The forges of Draveth never slept. Beneath the twin suns that bathed the planet in molten gold, colossal furnaces hummed, exhaling pillars of vapor into the bruised sky. Within that ceaseless industry, a human named Elias worked alone in the lower docks, a place where sparks floated like wandering stars, and the air tasted of iron and ozone. His hands were blackened with alloy dust as he welded a fractured stabilizer coil, the blue arc of plasma reflecting in his weary eyes. He was one of the few humans permitted on Draveth, and only because he could repair what even the dragons could not, the intricate human-made technology their empire had absorbed through conquest. The clang of his tools echoed down the empty corridor until a faint sound reached him, not mechanical, but soft, uncertain. A whimper, high-pitched and fragile, like static carried on the wind. Elias paused, turning his head toward the sound. It came from behind a sealed observation gate marked with the sigil of the royal brood. He shouldn't go there. Every mechanic knew that crossing into the royal sector without permission meant death. But curiosity, and something deeper, gentler, tugged him forward. He bypassed the sensor lock with a code spark, the gate sliding open with a hiss. Inside, the temperature dropped, and the hum of life support units filled the chamber. Rows of incubation pods lined the walls, each glowing faintly from within, except one. Its light flickered weakly, and through the translucent shell, Elias saw movement, a tiny creature, scales still soft, wings barely formed, crying in confusion. The hatchling's breath fogged the glass as its small claws pressed outward, desperate and trembling. Elias approached slowly, his reflection merging with the creature's golden eyes. The pod's internal warmth was failing, condensation formed, dripping like tears. He searched for tools, but the system was far too advanced for his basic repair kit. Then his gaze fell upon a canister of cleaning fluid and an old maintenance tube, and, for reasons even he couldn't explain, he smiled faintly. He dipped the tube, blew through it softly, and a shimmering bubble floated into the air. It caught the chamber's pale light, bending it into waves of blue and violet. The hatchling froze, its cries silenced by wonder. Another bubble rose, then another, drifting like living orbs through the sterile air. The creature reached out with uncertain claws, tapping one, and chirped. A sound so pure and delighted that Elias laughed before he realized he was doing it. Far above, unseen behind the surveillance glass embedded in the ceiling, a massive eye blinked. The Dragon Queen watched from her chamber, her vision linked through the palace's neural network. The sight was almost absurd, a fragile human, dirty and insignificant, playing with bubbles before one of her kind. Yet something in that fragile act. The simplicity, the uncalculated kindness, pressed against her chest like a forgotten ache. Down below, Elias continued blowing bubbles until the hatchling fell asleep, curled in the fading warmth. The mechanic sat beside the pod, silent, unaware of the gaze that followed him. In that moment, between the hum of the machines and the slow drift of the glowing spheres, a bond was born, one neither man nor monarch could yet name, but which would echo across the stars. The next cycles on Draveth passed beneath a haze of smoke and shimmering heat. Elias returned to his station every dawn, carrying tools, spare fuses, and a small vial of the viscous soap mixture he had kept from that strange evening. He told himself it was just for cleaning sensors, yet his steps always took him toward the same sealed chamber. Each time, the guards posted near the royal sector watched him with slit-pupiled eyes, silent but wary. None stopped him. Somewhere, in a higher chamber where the air shimmered with heat from the forges, the queen had given no order to interfere. Inside the incubation room, the hatchling had grown restless and curious. Its wings fluttered weakly whenever Elias approached, its gaze bright with recognition. He repaired the damaged heating unit, recalibrated oxygen levels, and even adjusted the pod's neural field so that the young creature could stretch and breathe freely. Once the system stabilized, he drew out the same metal tube, dipped it in the cleaning fluid, and blew softly. The bubbles rose again, luminous under the artificial lights, soft spheres floating through the metallic air. The hatchling leapt, chirped, and flapped, its tiny tail slicing through the bubbles with delight. High above, in the throne chamber of molten glass and carbon alloy, Queen Sareth watched the projection with stillness that unnerved her courtiers. She replayed the same few seconds, the mechanics' laughter, the hatchlings' joy, again and again. She had lived longer than most stars in this quadrant. She had incinerated fleets, silenced empires, ruled without pause. Yet she found herself staring at this fragile human gesture, feeling something she did not have a name for. Her advisors spoke of rebellion. Colonies in the outlying systems were refusing tribute, murmuring that the Queen's will had weakened since the last war. They demanded she strike fear again, to burn the dissent from their bones. But when she looked at them, their words dissolved like smoke. In her mind, she saw only a pair of small golden eyes reflected in a floating sphere of light. In the maintenance sectors, rumors began to spread. Some said the human had bewitched the Queen, others said the hatchling was cursed, and the monarch kept silent for fear of prophecy. Elias knew nothing of this. He spent his evenings beneath the dim glow of reactor lights, fashioning simple trinkets. Tiny rotating gears shaped like stars, made from scrap alloy, to hang near the pod. He spoke softly to the hatchling as though it could understand. Perhaps it did. Sometimes, when he left for the night, he felt a pulse beneath the metal floor, a subtle vibration, rhythmic and deep, as if the planet itself were listening. He would pause, glance upward toward the dark ceiling, and feel watched. Not with malice, but with a strange, immense curiosity. And far above him, the Queen lingered by the viewing platform longer each night, her immense silhouette outlined by the crimson light of the forges. Power had always been her truth, dominance her legacy. But now, as she watched a human coax joy from a creature not yet a day old, she wondered, had she mistaken fire for strength all these centuries? A storm of radiation swept through the upper atmosphere of Draveth, rippling across the planet's defense grid like a bruise of light. The magnetic towers around the capital hummed with overload warnings, their beacons flaring crimson against the sulfur clouds. In the royal nursery, lights flickered, monitors blinked erratically, and the air turned cold. Elias was beneath the primary reactor when he felt the tremor, a deep, guttural vibration that rattled every bolt in the wall. The emergency alarms ignited in a sequence of hollow, mechanical tones, echoing through the corridors. He dropped his tools and sprinted toward the royal sector. The guards had abandoned their posts, retreating toward secure bunkers, leaving the gates half open and the security fields collapsing in waves of static. The air smelled of scorched ozone and coolant. Elias passed through a corridor lined with silver panels that reflected him as 1,000 fragments of himself, each one more distorted than the last. He reached the incubation room, his pulse pounding in his throat. The hatchling was no longer safe within its pod. The temperature had plummeted, condensation coated the glass like frost. The tiny creature was shivering, its body dimming beneath its translucent scales. Without thinking, Elias slammed his fist against the control console. The circuit sparked. He ripped open a panel, bypassing the alien wiring with human-made clamps and a patch of fusion tape. Power surged, briefly stabilizing the system, but the heating unit refused to engage. He needed to reach the reactor directly, deep in the restricted core of the palace. He grabbed his toolkit and ran. The walls pulsed with red light as he descended into the heart of the citadel. His comlink buzzed with automated warnings in a language he barely understood. When he forced open the reactor chamber door, he was met with a torrent of blinding blue energy, swirling like a living storm around the cracked containment core. The machinery hissed as coolant sprayed into the air, crystallizing instantly. He climbed the maintenance scaffolding and began rerouting conduits, fingers trembling. The radiation levels climbed beyond safety limits, the warning indicators bleeding into one continuous scream. He tore off his gloves, working faster, reconfiguring the alignment nodes. Sparks rained down like falling stars. The final switch resisted his strength, he forced it with his bare hand, feeling the electric burn crawl through his veins. The roar of energy subsided. The lights flickered back to life. The hatchling's pod warmed again. Elias exhaled, staggering back, his arms trembling, his skin faintly glowing from radiation residue. That was when the temperature in the chamber shifted, not from the reactor, but from something alive. A shadow fell over him. He turned slowly, and there she was. The Dragon Queen. Her scales shimmered like obsidian under flame, wings folded tight, eyes vast and gold as collapsing stars. Her voice filled the air without sound, resonating in his bones. "You entered the core," she said, not in anger but disbelief. "You could have died." Elias knelt, unable to meet her gaze. "It was crying," he murmured, voice hoarse. "I couldn't let it die." For a long, endless moment, silence filled the air between them. Then the queen lowered her massive head, her breath rippling the air around him. "So be it," she said. "You will continue your work, but under my watch." The words echoed through the chamber as if sealed by the planet itself. And as the queen turned, her eyes lingered on the human, a fragile spark standing amid her empire of fire, and for the first time in her long reign, she felt something dangerously close to reverence. Elias no longer worked in the dim cargo bays. His tools now echoed in the golden halls of the royal citadel, surrounded by living fire and polished alloy that pulsed faintly with the rhythm of the queen's neural network. Every corridor whispered his name in mechanical tones, curious drones hovering silently to observe the human who had dared defy the royal protocols and lived. The hatchling he had saved now moved freely, a small shadow darting behind him, scales glinting silver blue as it played among the cables and sparks. Wherever Elias went, the creature followed, its chirps bright against the low hum of engines buried beneath the palace. The queen watched from her high platform, unseen yet present in every reflection. Her vast consciousness was linked to every sensor, every thread of light that ran through the citadel's structure. She saw him shape toys from spare alloy, tiny mechanical birds that flitted around the hatchling's head, wings beating with faint bursts of energy. He taught it to chase beams of projected light, laughing softly when it tripped over its own wings. The sound of his laughter resonated through her neural circuits like an alien melody, softening frequencies she didn't know could exist. In her war chamber, the queen's advisors grew restless. They spoke of decline, of enemies gathering beyond the Veil Nebula, of colonies whispering rebellion. They wanted her fury, her old fire. Yet when they demanded action, she remained quiet, her claw resting on the throne's energy conduits. "Fear is efficient," one general hissed, his scales flickering red. "Mercy invites invasion." The queen turned her gaze upon him, and for the first time in decades, her answer was not a roar but a whisper. "Perhaps efficiency is not all that sustains a realm." The general bowed, trembling, uncertain if she had gone mad or become something he could no longer comprehend. That night, when the citadel dimmed to its nocturnal glow, the queen descended to the lower levels in silence. Her massive form barely disturbed the gravity fields as she approached the nursery chamber. Elias was there, cross-legged on the metallic floor, his hands stained with lubricant, the hatchling curled in his lap. He was humming, a human song, low and haunting. She watched from the shadows, unseen, her bioluminescent eyes dimmed. The hatchling raised its head suddenly, sensing her presence. It chirped, flapping its tiny wings, and Elias turned. He froze as her towering figure stepped into the light. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, to his astonishment, she lowered herself onto her forelimbs, her head tilting toward the sleeping creature between them. "He will grow strong," Elias said quietly. "But strength isn't only in the claws." Her gaze flickered, the ancient intelligence within her processing the words like equations. "You speak as if you have seen many kinds of strength," she murmured. "Only the kind that keeps something small alive," he replied. For the first time, the queen's lips curved, not into a snarl, but into something fragile, uncertain, and almost human. The firelight from the reactors shimmered between them, casting reflections of gold across her scales. Somewhere beyond the citadel walls, ships of rebellion stirred in the void, unaware that their queen's heart was already changing shape. The first tremors of war came without sound. A ripple through the palace's gravitational lattice, a faint distortion in the defensive satellite's telemetry. Elias noticed it before the alarms did, the subtle shiver in the walls, the flickering rhythm of the energy conduits that fed the citadel's heart. When the sirens finally screamed, he was already running toward the nursery. The hatchling, now larger, scales gleaming like molten silver, was trembling beneath the echo of distant thunder. Through the transparent dome above, he saw flashes of red light streaking across the sky, ships descending, hundreds of them, their exhaust trails like burning comets. The Queen's voice thundered across every communication channel, her command sharp enough to fracture the air. Raise the plasma barrier. Activate all orbital sentinels. The citadel rumbled as its shields formed, a great dome of refracted light, pulsing blue against the darkness. From his vantage point in the lower sectors, Elias could see the war unfold beyond the atmosphere. Entire fleets clashing in silence, the explosions diffusing like stars being born and dying in the same instant. But then came the impact. A direct strike hit the lower defense grid, shattering part of the shield network. Energy surged through the conduits, tearing apart control panels and melting circuits. The power feeds to the royal nursery flickered violently, the containment systems failing one by one. Elias shouted, running to stabilize them, but his human hands could only do so much. The hatchling cried out, its wings flaring in panic. He remembered the bubble fluid, the strange, iridescent mixture that reacted to plasma light. He tore open the emergency cabinet and poured it into the coolant vents, knowing it was reckless, maybe suicidal. The chemicals interacted instantly, creating a glowing mist that spread through the chamber. When the power relays reignited, the mist condensed into floating orbs, luminous, perfect spheres of energy, drifting upward like bubbles made of starlight. Outside, the dome shimmered. The defense barrier, once a simple grid of plasma, took on the same spectral hue, glowing with the soft colors of the mechanic's improvised reaction. The enemy fleet hesitated, confused by the sudden phenomenon. To them, the light appeared not as a weapon, but as a sign, countless orbs reflecting the enemy ships, transforming the sky into a mosaic of peace rather than fire. The Queen, from her command throne, saw the display through the panoramic glass. Her heart clenched with recognition. It was his doing. The bubbles again, the same fragile beauty that had silenced her child. She paused her next order, her claws hovering above the control console. Her generals waited for the command to unleash the annihilation protocols. Instead, she spoke softly, target engines, not hearts. Disable. Do not destroy. Her fleet obeyed. Precision beams tore through enemy ships, rendering them motionless without death. Within hours, the invasion collapsed. The surviving enemy vessels drifted silently among the shining remnants of the energy spheres, too stunned to continue. In the lower chambers, Elias slumped against a wall, the light from the bubbles casting fractured reflections across his face. The hatchling curled beside him, humming softly. Far above, the Queen stood alone in the afterglow of victory that did not taste like conquest. For the first time, she had won without blood, and she understood why. The warships withdrew like fading ghosts, their fractured hulls glinting in the soft afterlight of Dravatha's twin suns. The sky, once burning with fire, was now veiled in a tranquil glow. The great plasma dome still shimmered faintly, alive with the residual colors of Elias's improvised miracle. Within the citadel, the forges had gone silent for the first time in a century. Smoke rose in slow, silver columns, curling toward a sky that no longer trembled with war. Elias stood on the balcony that overlooked the capital, his clothes stained with soot and coolant, his hair haloed by the pale light of dawn. The hatchling rested beside him, no longer frail, but radiant, its wings spreading wide to catch the wind. Behind him, the air rippled with energy as the Queen descended, her immense form framed against the horizon. She landed softly, the metal beneath her claws melting and cooling again in the same breath. For a long time, neither spoke. The planet itself seemed to listen, holding its breath. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was lower than before, stripped of command, heavy with something older. "You have changed what my people believe power is," she said. "You've undone centuries of fear with something fragile enough to vanish at a touch." Elias smiled faintly. "Fragile things last longer than we think," he said, nodding toward the bubbles that still floated high above the citadel, their surfaces reflecting both dragon and man. The queen's golden eyes softened. "The hatchling is yours to guide now. He will remember you as his first kin." He turned, startled. "Mine? I'm only human. I can't raise." "You already have," she interrupted, her voice carrying a warmth that bent the air itself. "You gave him life when none of my kind could. You taught him mercy when I could not. That is more than any title or bloodline." She lifted her head toward the stars, her mind linking once again to the Empire's network. Across the void, her commands rippled, the dismantling of conquest fleets, the deactivation of slave systems, the recall of every weaponized drone. The war empire of Draveth was ending, not with fire, but with a whisper. Elias watched her wings shimmer as sunlight caught their edges. For the first time, they didn't look like instruments of war, but of flight, vast and free. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. "I will learn," she said. "And perhaps, remember what it means to feel small again." A gentle wind carried the scent of plasma and rain. The hatchling lifted its head, exhaled a stream of glowing breath, and released it skyward, bubbles of light scattering across the morning sky like newborn stars. The queen's gaze followed them until they vanished into the upper atmosphere. Elias rested a hand on the hatchling's neck, feeling its heartbeat steady beneath his palm. Somewhere deep within the citadel, the forges began to cool completely, their eternal flames dimming into silence. The age of fire had ended. Above the horizon, where the twin suns met, the last of the shimmering bubbles rose higher, crossing the boundary between atmosphere and void. They drifted into the dark, carrying reflections of a mechanic, a queen, and a child, and the fragile truth that in a universe forged by violence, gentleness could still remake worlds.